Good morning. As many of you know, or maybe have heard, Mrs. Siard, every 4 years, has been called for the last 20 years to bring us the story of her brother. I never met Andy, but I feel like I know Andy. And I love Andy. You know Mrs. Siard. Those of you that have Mrs. Siard or have had Mrs. Siard know she's a woman of great passion. She's a woman of great discipline. She's a woman who loves the Lord fiercely. She loves you fiercely. She will tell you the truth, right? She will tell you what she knows you need to hear, even if it's not easy for her to say and it's not easy for you to hear. But she loves you tremendously. And it is out of that great love and her tremendous obedience to the Lord and her love for her brother that she comes again this year to share his story. So please welcome her.
So first of all, I want to start out by thanking so many people who have been praying about this. For some reason, the older I get, the harder this story is to share. I don't know if it's because I now have a son that's around the age that my brother was, but this year I've had an extremely difficult time just practicing and gathering my thoughts and getting ready to do this. I have cried more tears than you can imagine in the last week. So just it's a hard story to tell, and I appreciate your attention. What made me decide to tell this story the first time 20 years ago was that we had a speaker in chapel who was talking to our students about drugs and alcohol and about how he had been involved in that lifestyle and then God rescued him from it. And afterwards, I heard some of my very sweet students, and I still remember the little girl who said this, but I heard one girl say to her friends, "I'm really tired of these people who have all their fun when they're young, and then they come back and tell us not to do it." And it just hit me that basically among people who start down the road of drugs and alcohol, they fall into three categories. You have people who get involved in that lifestyle and come out of it, and they want to tell you how bad it was because they're trying to save you pain. You have people who have gotten involved in that and never come out of it, and they're a mess. They can't tell you not to do it because their lives are such disasters. And you have people who got involved in the lifestyle and died. And I'm here to speak to you on behalf of that group of people. When I was growing up, I'm just going to give you kind of my overview of my family, and then I'm going to read you a lot of things that Andy actually wrote. But my parents got divorced when I was 4. You may remember I told you some earlier this year that my father was an alcoholic. So my mother divorced him when I was 4. Andy was 4 years younger than me, so he was just a baby. My mother got remarried when I was 7, and we kind of had a normal family. We went on vacations, we went camping, we had birthday parties, we had dinners together every night, just kind of normal family. And when I was in 9th grade, my mother sat us down, Andy and me, and told us that she was pregnant. So I was thrilled once I got over the shock, but I was thrilled. And my little brother Brandon was born later that year, the summer after I was in 9th grade. I'll show you a few pictures from family life. Keep in mind, cameras didn't used to be quite so good, and these pictures are very old. They have faded some. And for some reason, I used to chop my pictures off. Andy loved to hunt. I think that was his first deer. I think that was Christmas. So as we got to be teenagers, Andy got into a lot of things that a lot of teenagers get into, as far as he was really into loud, dark music, which I hated. He was really into just wearing things that looked rebellious, always had chains on him, and I didn't like that either. We weren't very close when we were teenagers. I was a goody two-shoes, which probably doesn't surprise those of you who know me. But I'll talk more about that next week. Not all of those who appear to be goody two-shoes are really as perfect as they appear. But that I was that way. He was very rebellious, and he didn't try to hide it. So we were not close at all when we were teenagers. We really didn't like each other very much. As I went away to college and then eventually got married and moved to Tennessee, I grew up in Pennsylvania. So over the course of probably 5 or 6 years, I wasn't living at home, but I talked to my mother on the phone a lot, a couple times a week. And so many of our phone calls, she would tell me about phone calls she had gotten from the police, phone calls from hospitals, from the jail. She just never knew in the middle of the night when she would get a phone call that that Andy was in a fight and she needed to go pick him up somewhere. And her life was absolute chaos during that time. In fact, she would cry to me every weekend, and I would get off the phone and tell my husband about how stressful this was. And finally I said, Mom, you just need to make him move out, because Brandon, our little brother, was 10 at the time, and the two of them were sharing a room. It was a very small house. So a 10-year-old was seeing a whole lot of things that he shouldn't have been seeing when Andy would come in the middle of the night sometimes. So I'm going to read you some things. Andy wrote poems sometimes, I guess, as just a release or as a kind of journaling. So the first thing that I'm going to read you is called Problems Alcohol Caused Me, and there's no date on it, so I really don't know when he wrote this. I've been fined for underage drinking 6 times. I've been convicted of drinking and driving once. I wrecked and totaled my car, which led to my inability to afford insurance. I've lost the respect that my parents had for me. I've lost self-respect. I almost lost my job as a manager at Napa Auto Parts. I lost the respect that my little brother had for me. I've hurt my girlfriend many times. Alcohol has put me probably over $3,000 in debt since I was 14. Alcohol has caused me to lose respect for God. This next one, he actually titled this. It's called Reflections. And again, I will have dates for a lot of these, but I don't have one for this. And let me say, I'm going to read the words that he wrote. Some of them are words that I would not normally read and that you don't normally hear in chapel. So in an attempt to be authentic, I'm going to read you the words that he wrote. Just a carefree kid out running wild. My thoughts of the future often shattered by things of the present that didn't matter. As I grew older, my ways were the same. I had the idea life's only a game. So to win, I cheated, but instead I lost. And as a loser, I'm paying the cost. But as I think of these thoughts in the night and begin to see that my past wasn't right, I plan for a future I hope will be a way of life to satisfy me. From here on, I'm kind of going to take you through the last 6 to 8 months of his life. So that's why I'll give you some dates for a little bit of a timetable. So this was written on July 5th, 1989. And he wrote this while he was in jail. Life so full of dreams and scenes, so damn disgusting, so it seems. It gets me sick and turns my gut. Here I sit in the same old rut. There could have been another way to be so free, to run and play, but this is the way I choose, and I'm not going to change or rearrange, and I ain't never going to lose. I sit and think so many times of the fun I had committing my crimes, and the prices I paid just to have fun, and the times I ended up hurting someone. How can I only be 21 and had myself so much fun? These are things I often wonder as the thoughts go through my brain like thunder. So that was July 5th. July 14th, he wrote me a letter, and I'm just reading excerpts. I'm back at Woodville now, which Woodville was a mental hospital. I took off last Friday and sadly turned myself in to the state police on Monday. I lost my ground card and have to stay inside for 10 days and start from square one. I found out a few things that I've been wanting to find out while I was out for the weekend. First of all, I got in touch with Roxanne. That was his girlfriend, and you'll hear more about her later. But I got in touch with Roxanne's mother and found out that Roxanne had our baby on June 17th. It was a healthy little girl. I don't even know its birth weight or what she named it. She put the innocent little girl up for adoption. I don't know how she could have done this. The other thing I found out is that I can go to work as soon as I get out of here. A friend's boss said he would hire me when I get discharged. I really want to go back to work. Sitting here with all this time just eats away at me. I would be working on riverboats and staying out on the river for 2 to 5 weeks at a time. It sounds like the kind of job I want and need. The only thing is, I have to call my probation officer and see about the time I'll have to serve. I've been feeling pretty confident about myself lately. Now I know where I stand with Roxanne, and I know that it's over. I have to pick up my head and pick up the pieces and start building again. I want to have what I did before and even more. I really have some good friends from my stay at the last hospital, and they've helped me out a lot. I love you both, this was to my husband and me, and appreciate all of your support and help. Love, Andy. So that was July 14th. This is August 24th. This is again written from jail. Here I sit again, behind the bars I'm held within. Now I have no one but myself, as I'm hanging on the edge of this shelf. I can work hard and climb back up, or fall back into the rut. I need God's strength and power to rain down on me like a shower. Better days are yet to come. I know someday I'll see the sun. I want to have a life someday. The time has come to quit running away. I'll pay my price for what I've done and quit asking why I'm the one. I end this poem in painful tears by thanking God someone still cares. So that was August. This is September. I'm locked up again. This is a letter to me. I'm locked up again for 14 days this time. Last week on Friday, I had a 12-hour pass, and I went down to the regatta in Pittsburgh. I met up with a guy that I graduated with. It turned out that he has his own yacht, and I went out on it with him. There was a giant party on it, and I wound up drunk. I came back the next day, and they postponed my discharge. I was supposed to get out of here on August 11th, but now it looks like I'll be here through the end of September. I talked to Mom last night and found out that Roxanne didn't put our baby up for adoption. That really made me happy and gives me something to work for and look forward to. I've been doing a lot of hard praying lately, and God seems to be helping me get through some really tough times. I just hope I can continue to stay on the right track this time. I'm really getting discouraged and disgusted with the way I've been living. Every time I go back to drinking, it just gets worse. I have less fun. I'm finally believing it's only fun in the beginning. I have a couple of friends up here with me that are Christians, and we have prayer meetings together. I hope you are doing well. Love, Andy. So, as I said, those years were very tumultuous. He did want to be free. He couldn't get free. He would get free, but for short periods of time, and then he would turn and walk right back into the lifestyle. During these last probably 6 to 8 months of his life, Andy took a big interest in family. He obviously had a lot of damaged relationships, and he was trying to build relationships. He was trying to be a good big brother for Brandon, our little brother. He was obviously writing letters with me. He would call me on the phone. We had never done stuff like that before. He had a genuine desire to walk away from this lifestyle and be free and start having a future, but he just kept getting sucked back in, and that's what addiction does. It just won't let go, and it keeps pulling the person back in, and we'll talk more about that next week. He also developed more of an interest in God. He was having Bible studies. He was praying with people in these different places that he stayed. I just want to point out, I mentioned that he was in a mental hospital. He went all different places during those years. He kind of needed somewhere to live, and he would go. There are a lot of people who just check in wherever somebody will take them in a program so that they have somewhere to live for a few days. Sometimes it was appointed by the law that he either had to go to jail or he had to check into some kind of a hospital or a rehab or something like that. So sometimes he went by choice. Sometimes he went because it was the lesser of two evils as far as his choices. During much of this time, my husband and I were living in Tennessee, and my husband has always been a man who, if a church has an early morning prayer meeting and there are only 2 people there, my husband is one of them. And during that time, my husband was praying with a man named Jim, who, although he had never met my brother, he took a very strong interest in praying for him, really took it upon himself that praying for Andy was something that would be a regular part of his life. And hold on to that thought because it'll come back later. So I think it was in October that Andy went into another rehab, and part of what he had to do there was write what's called a chemical history. And he basically had to write his story as far as how he got started on this path and how he ended up at this rehab. At this time, I was teaching out in Seymour at King's Academy, and I taught 8th graders. Those of you who know me may find that hard to believe, but I loved my 8th graders. Didn't always have the most patience with them, but they were sweet kids. And one day, I just got the idea that if Andy was going to be in the hospital for 30 days, it might be nice for him to get a piece of mail every day. So one day in class, I gave my students about 20 minutes, and I handed out some school stationery, and they sat and wrote letters of encouragement. I told them they could write Bible verses or write letters. Ironically, a lot of those students, and I didn't know this at the time, but a lot of those students came from troubled families that had problems with drugs and alcohol. And I never read the letters. The kids wrote them and sealed them, and I put the postage on them and mailed them. And I never read those letters at the time. But we made sure that Andy got mail every day just because I thought that would probably be a highlight. So keep that in mind. It'll come back too. But what I'm going to read you next is, this is Andy's life story as he remembers it. And the first page of this is a letter that he wrote to those students who had written to him. I see some heads down, and I'd really appreciate it if you would sit up and listen. This is not easy to do. Thank you. So this front page is a letter that he wrote to my students, but I've really had a sense this year that you are the students that this is being spoken to. So I'm asking you to hear this as if Andy is saying this to you. Dear friends, I really appreciate each and every one of you for taking time from your life and problems to pray for me and write me encouraging letters. I want you to know that I thank God for all of you every night and pray that He will be with you. I hope that you will have a better understanding of what I have been through with the enclosed chemical history about myself. I also hope that it will quickly show you how fast you can screw up your whole life. Most of you are about the age that I was when I went into this terrible stage of life. Please listen. Love, your friend, Andy. I was born on September 20th, 1967. My mother divorced my father when I was 3 months old. I have an older sister, which went to live with my grandparents along with me and my mom. My mother met a man and married him when I was 4 years old. He was a good father and cared for us and loved us a lot. My mother and stepfather quit drinking right after they got married, not that they drank much before that. I had a pretty good childhood. My mother got pregnant and had my little brother when I was 12 years old. This is when things started to change. My older sister was perfect. She got straight A's in school. She never got into trouble or anything. My little brother was the center of attention, which is normal. I felt that I really didn't have a place to fit in. As my brother was getting a little older, I used to tease him. For what, I don't really know. At the age of 14, I had my first drink, which was a half a pint of black velvet that me and my friends stole out of his father's liquor cabinet. I loved it because I could escape my problems, feel more comfortable, impress other kids, and I just liked the fact that I knew it was wrong. This went on for some time and progressively turned into every weekend. By the time I was 16, I was drinking 3 or 4 times a week. I got my first underage drinking fine around this time. My parents grounded me to my room every time I came home with alcohol on my breath. This just gave me the opportunity to try smoking weed. So now I was drinking when I knew I could get away with it and smoking weed when I would have to face my parents. By the time I turned 17, I'd been busted 3 times for underage drinking, and I was tired of being grounded. So I became a heavy weed smoker and just about shut the alcohol out. Well, when I turned 18, I had freedom, a car, a good job, and money to blow. So this began my drinking again and smoking, and now I tried my first line of cocaine. I loved it. I didn't try cocaine again until about 6 months later when I met this special girl in my life, and I wanted her to have this great feeling also. The first time that we did it together, we promised each other we would never do it when we were apart. Well, I blew that one down the drain. I started getting it every weekend and doing a little bit with her when we went to the motel. Then I would save the rest for me. Life was going great now. I had a car, a job, money, freedom, booze, weed, coke, and a beautiful girl to enjoy it with. When I hit 19, I noticed I was starting to black out. But I figured, what the hell, it's worth it. So from here out, this might not fit together that well. By this time, most of my nights were spent drinking a fifth of wild turkey and driving around with 1 or 2 of my buddies until I had to pick Roxanne up from work. This went on every night for about 6 months. About this time, I said, hey, enough of these blackouts. So I slowed down on the whiskey and started drinking a lot more beer. In January of 1988, me and Rox got in an argument, and I hit her for lying to me. I was drunk out of my mind, So I went to the liquor store and bought a fifth of wild turkey, and me and a buddy went to a motel to start on a binge. The next day I got my first DUI. This didn't change anything. I got back with my girlfriend and continued to party. I was told to find a place of my own in February of 1988, and I did so. I moved in with an older man that I worked with, and I lived there a month before he kicked me out. I couldn't blame him. This is when I got really into cocaine. I moved to a second-floor apartment with a good friend of mine. This was great. I had a party every night, whether I knew it or not. Everyone I knew just said, "Hey, let's go over Andy's house and party." I never turned them down because I loved it. This went on until summer, with the police being there nearly twice a week because of the noise and fights. By this time, me and Rox were living together. Her mother figured she was sleeping at my apartment 2 or 3 times a week. She might as well live there. So she packed all of Rox's clothes up and put them on my porch. Great, this was what I wanted anyway. After about 3 weeks of being drunk and blacked out all the time, me and Rox were physically abusing each other, as well as verbal abuse. Well, I ended up having a wild party one night, and there was a big fight. The drop ceiling was ripped down, 2 doors were ripped off the hinges, and there were numerous holes in the walls. So on to another apartment with 3 days to find one. This time, I didn't care where I was, just so I could have a place to party and keep my belongings. So I moved into a one-room apartment with Rox and another friend. This was a big downfall for me because I quit my job. While I was on a 2-week binge, one day I had a party at the apartment, and there was a lady across the street staring up at my window. I made some remarks to her, and a buddy of mine pulled his shorts down in front of the window. The lady screamed that she was going to call the police, so we took off for the bar. When I arrived back at the apartment that evening, I was arrested for indecent exposure. I went down to the police station, and the chief said they didn't have any evidence it was me, so they took me back home. And I told the cop, "Thanks for the free scenic ride." He didn't like that. Exactly 1 week later, the same cop came back to my apartment with a warrant. I was stoned out of my mind, and I hit 2 of the cops. They beat me until I was black and blue, and then sprayed me with mace. I was blinded and burning for at least 4 hours in the holding cell. From there, I went to the county jail with a $5,000 straight bail. I spent a week in there in the mental ward with constant lockup before my stepfather put up bail. When I got out, I was clean for about 2 weeks, and then my stepfather got me a good job, and I got another apartment with my girlfriend. Things were starting to look better for us. Back to the same thing all over again. I had a lot more money now to buy cocaine and booze. Me and Rox were back to physical and verbal abuse, but now it was almost always me doing it. In December of '88, I was sitting in a bar, and my real dad walked in. I was blown away. I hadn't seen him for about 5 years. He looked at me, and I motioned for him to come over to where I was sitting. He said, "Blank you, come over here." He didn't even know who I was until I told him. Well, it didn't bother me much because I was half stoned. We decided to go to another bar and shoot pool and finish getting drunk. Around the middle of December, I was on a binge, and I set up a cocaine deal. I drove out to Greensburg to get an ounce and took it back to White Oak where I was drinking. Me and 3 of my buddies went out to the car. My 2 good buddies were in the front, and I was in the back with the guy that wanted to buy the ounce. I pulled the ounce out, and the guy next to me pulled a gun out and put it to my head. I said, "What the hell is going on?" And the next thing I knew, the guy in the front turned around and hit him with a club and knocked his head through the rear window. Well, I got my money and got the hell out of there. You'd think by now I would have learned. The next day, I went out and got some cocaine and met up with a friend of mine that knew how to mainline, which if you don't know, that's injecting it into your veins. This didn't have a great effect on me because I had about a half of a fifth in me already. The second week of January, I came home drunk out of my head and told Rox she could use my car to go over to her mother's house. Then I passed out. When I woke up, I didn't know where Rox was, and I didn't know where my car was. I thought she left me. I had 900 milligrams of Demerol and 1,500 milligrams of caffeine, so I took them all and hoped for a peaceful ending. I left the apartment and went to the bar and started drinking. The only problem was that after every beer, I had to run outside and puke it back up. Oh well. Rox came back home that night, and there was physical and verbal abuse again. I laid in my bed and shook and sweated and puked for 3 days. 1 week later, January 20th, was her mother's wedding. The night before, I went out and sold my $400 stereo for a gram of cocaine. The day of the wedding, I smoked a half of a gram of coke and had been drinking for about 20 hours. When we got to the reception, I started drinking whiskey. About a half a bottle later, I was fighting with anyone I could see, which was pretty rough because I was blind from being drunk. Well, it ends up I got in a fight outside with a guy, and he got into one of the limos that were rented, and I punched 2 of the windows out of it and embedded glass into his face. I was a maniac. I didn't know what I was doing. In fact, I ended up at my apartment that night and came to in the morning and wondered what happened. I called my girlfriend's mother to see where she was, and her mother told me what I had done and that she had the whole thing on videotape. I went out to drink my hangover away and called off work. The next day, it hit me like a sledgehammer, but I made it to work that night. I came home from work and walked in the door. I thought I was in hell. I couldn't bear the guilt, remorse, or pain of what I had done. I was scared to death of my apartment without Rox there, and I felt like killing myself. I lost my mind and ran out of the apartment. I went to work for the rest of the week, but I couldn't go back to my apartment because I was scared of it, so I rode around in my car until Thursday, when I went over to my mother's house and told her what I had done. I decided I'll do or die or kill someone else, so I made an appointment to come here on the following Tuesday. I stayed at my mother's house for the following days. Sunday night, I went out and drank a pint of Jim Beam and half a case of beer. After doing this, I picked up a girl I knew from AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, if you don't know. We went for a ride to my friend's house to get some cocaine. When I came out of his house and got in the car to leave, the car wouldn't go in reverse. I figured, hell, I'll just drive up on the sidewalk and turn around. I was arrested for my second DUI and taken to the county jail again. Now I'm in jail with a $1,000 bail, and I was already out on a $5,000 bail. I lost Rox, my baby, 7 cars, my friends, my job, and about $6,000 in fines from drugs and alcohol. This is it. You can't get any deeper in the hole. Fortunately, my stepfather bailed me out of jail, held my job, and drove me here. That's just one of the cars. It's Andy and Roxanne. And keep in mind, it was the 80s. That was her prom. Wait, I gotta see where I am. So, as I said, I think he wrote that sometime around October, might have been November. So, Christmas 1989, my husband and I drove back up to Pennsylvania. I was pregnant with my first child, my daughter, at this time, and was suffering morning sickness pretty fiercely. So when we got up to Pennsylvania, my husband's parents lived about 20 minutes away from my parents. So for a couple of days, he went and stayed with his parents, and I wasn't feeling well, so I stayed with my mom, and Andy was staying there. So it was a wonderful Christmas. It was our family in a way that we hadn't had since we were little. Andy and I played a lot of board games, which we never did. We stayed up talking late at night. We made fires and just sat and stared in the fire and talked. We drank hot chocolate. We walked in the snow. Pennsylvania knows how to have winter. We actually had snow, took the dog for a walk. Just a lot of the things that you would hope you could do with your adult sibling. So it was a wonderful Christmas. A little comic relief, I said I was very sick. He actually offered to go to the store and get me something to try to help settle my stomach. And then when he brought it back and I took it, it didn't quite do the job, and I ended up getting sick anyway. And when I was in the bathroom yelling for a plunger, he brought it to me and made some kind of smart comment, and I just thought, he wouldn't have even done this for me a couple years ago. So it was sweet. I just have a lot of mental pictures of that Christmas that are priceless to me, and it was a great visit. He was sober all week. He didn't use anything, and it wasn't a full week. It was probably about 5 days, but it was a magical Christmas for me. When the week was over and we were getting ready to leave to come back to Tennessee, I remember saying goodbye to him. We were standing at my mother's front door. He had on black boots. He had on jeans. He had a chain hanging from his pocket, as he always did. He had on a white men's strap undershirt, and he hugged me, which we didn't used to do that either. And I said, it was wonderful spending the week with you. And he said, you too. And I said, well, I love you, but I don't know that I could ever live with you again. And he said, I know what you mean, Lise. And then we left. We came back to Tennessee. Oh, I forgot to mention an important part. My mother had actually talked to Roxanne, and we were able to get the baby for a visit for a few hours. So this was the only time that Andy got to see his baby, but he did get to see her. So that's our brother Brandon on the left, and Cassie is his daughter. This was the last picture that was ever taken with my mother and all three of her kids. And I'll talk about that one in a minute. So we left. We came back to Tennessee. During much of January and part of February, Andy was staying at my mother's during the week and going to work with my stepdad. And on the weekends, though, he would go back to his apartment, which was in a bad section of town. And the amazing part is he had gotten off of all the drugs. No cocaine, no heroin, no pot. All he was doing was drinking, and I think he was only drinking beer, and it was only on the weekends. So he was seriously trying to change his life and be responsible. So that's what went on pretty much January and part of February. February 22nd, 1990. It was about 3:05. I was in my classroom. I remember exactly what I was wearing. I was teaching a lesson on electricity. My phone rang in my classroom, and we had real phones that could connect with the outside world. And the receptionist from upstairs said that I had a phone call from my mother. So I took the phone, and of course it had a cord, pulled it out into the hall. And I said, "Mom." And I heard gasps. And I said, "Mom." And she was just making sounds. And I said, "Is it Andy?" And she didn't say anything. And I said, "Is it Andy?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Is he dead?" And she said, "Yes." And I remember feeling the cinder block wall smack me in the back. And I felt my knees go out from under me. And I felt myself sliding down that ice cold wall. And my baby that was in my stomach, my whole stomach just started these violent spasms to the point that I thought I was going to lose the baby. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have to go back in and tell these sweet kids who have been praying and writing letters, and they're sitting in there wondering what I'm doing out here. So I went back into the classroom, and I knew I couldn't fall apart yet. So I just told them, and I said I had to go. So I took off. We had to make the 9-hour drive to Pennsylvania through that evening and late into the night. It was a very difficult trip. Cried a lot. Actually laughed some. If any of you have lost somebody close and you cry and you cry and you cry until you can't cry anymore, and then sometimes you start thinking of stories that make you laugh. I think it's a protective thing our bodies do. But the whole trip, I was just overwhelmed with the thought of, where is he? Where's Andy? And that was such an overwhelming thing that I could not quit thinking about. We got into my mom's house at about 2 a.m. I collapsed in bed. My husband did not. My husband went downstairs and prayed the rest of the night. And at about 5 or 6 a.m, he made a phone call to Jim, because Jim knew that Andy died. And Jim said, "I've been praying all night too." And Jim said to my husband, "God told me that Andy's with him." And my husband said, "God just told me the same thing." 2 men, 500 miles apart. A few days later, we were at the funeral home. And if you've ever been in a funeral home, you know there's usually a long line of people waiting in line to go up and talk to the family. A couple of things that caught our attention. One was Andy's roommate, who he was just living with on the weekends, came up to us holding this little plastic cage with a rodent in it. And he said, "I thought you might want this mouse." He said, "Andy bought this a couple weeks ago because he wanted something to take care of." So my little brother got to have that mouse for a couple years, and it brought him a lot of comfort. There was another man. He was an older man. He was dirty. He was wearing work clothes, and he came up to us and said, "I'm a truck driver." He said, "I've known Andy for years." Andy was frequently without a car and or a license. So he walked a lot. Like, he walked highways and places that a lot of people don't. So some people just kind of knew him as the guy who was always out walking. And this man, I don't remember all the details, but this man said, I've talked to Andy for years. He said, and I ran into him just recently. He said he was walking down the road, and I pulled up behind him, and I called his name. And he said, when Andy turned around, his face was different. He said he had a look of peace and joy on his face that he didn't used to have. And he just said, "I thought you might want to know that." My husband wrote the eulogy for Andy's funeral, and I'm going to read you some of that. I really liked Andy a lot. He was a nice guy. It was also no secret, and Andy would humbly admit, that he was addicted to alcohol. For this reason, people who knew him well would say there were two Andys. I really only knew one, and that's the one I'd like to talk about. 2 months ago, he and I hiked up to a place known as 90-Foot Rock. That's what this picture is. This is the last picture that was ever taken of my brother. It was still in the camera when he died. We spent over a half hour up there, mostly just enjoying the quiet and serenity of the place. He would look in the distance, look for deer in the woods, mostly just look relaxed. He told me how those times really cleared his mind and helped him think. During our hike, we talked about a lot of different things. I remember asking him if he had a problem with knowing God loves him. He said that when he looks at all the ways God has helped him, he knows God loves him. A bit later in the hike, I told him, "You may think this is stupid," but then I hugged him and told him that I loved him. After hugging me, he said, "I don't think it's stupid. I don't think it's one bit stupid. I've learned that we need that." I really liked Andy a lot. He was a really nice guy, and I'm richer for having the honor of knowing him. But Andy did have a problem with alcohol addiction. Just before we visited him this past Christmas, he screwed up. I asked him how he was doing. He said, "Not too good, Tom, and I really want you to pray over me." We prayed earnestly and talked a lot. He told me he wanted to beat this habit worse than anything else in the world, and then he said he didn't blame anybody for not believing him. I told him I believed him 100%. I asked him if it was tough staying away from the alcohol. He said, "Tom, it's been really tough. It was really bad last night." I asked, "Well, what happened? Did the urge go away?" He said, "I prayed. It went away some, and then I was able to sleep okay." I really liked Andy a lot. Over the past 2 months, I have not seen him, yet those who have, his family and even some people who don't know him well, notice a real change for the better, a turnaround in his life. Yet I suppose if you added up all the good things he had done over the past several years and tried to balance them against the bad things would win. Jesus was put to death on the cross with 2 criminals. One of them admitted he deserved to be killed for his crimes, yet he earnestly called out to Jesus, dying beside him, "Jesus, remember me when you come to your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Likewise, God does not look at Andy as someone who screwed up a lot. God looks at him now, even face to face, as a person who earnestly called out to Jesus and was heard. So, the police did not know at first how Andy died. He was found along the edge of a river by some boys who were skipping school to go fishing. So they did a murder investigation, and it took us close to a month to find out what happened. So we knew that he had a big gash on his head, a big bump and a gash on his head. And I guess that's part of why they were doing a murder investigation. So now I'm going to show you the ugliest thing I own. I hate this. I hate to even touch it. This is the bag that the morgue handed my stepdad with all of the possessions that Andy had to his name when he died. And I knew that a lot of people wouldn't be able to see what's in it, so I made a slide. He had a chain around his neck, and he had a dime in his pocket. That's what he had to his name. When we went to Andy's apartment to clean out his belongings, we were partly amazed at how little he owned. He had sold everything for drugs. He did not own much at all. But we found a few things that were surprising to us. One thing that we found was my husband, my mother and I, my grandmother, we had all written him. I'm going to set the mic down in a minute because I don't have enough hands. We had all written him a lot of cards while he was in all of his hospitals. So there's a whole bunch there. Probably more precious to me was the fact that every one of those letters that my little 8th graders had written him, he saved. So I finally did get to read the letters after all of this. Another thing was that we found a lot of things in his apartment that had the poem Footprints in the Sand. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but he had just a lot of plaques and stickers and just a lot of different things. So it had a special meaning to him. So I'm going to play a video of it's somebody reading the poem.
Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and lowest times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. And I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. And the Lord replied, my son, my precious child, I love you, and I would never leave you. During your times of suffering, when you could see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you.
Sorry for the poor sound. Am I on? Okay. Sorry that wasn't of the highest quality sound. So for a few weeks, we didn't know how Andy died. When my mother finally got the phone call, the policeman told her that what they determined had happened after the autopsy and the investigation of the scene. Apparently, Andy had been at a bar across the street and drank over half a case of just beer, none of the other stuff, just beer. And if you remember, he had said earlier that he drank over half a case, so apparently that was something that wasn't that unusual for him. He loved nature. He most likely took that, what was left of that case, walked across the road, went down an embankment to go down by the water. He probably fell and hit his head on a rock. There was blood in his face. He probably went over to the water to try to clear that blood off, and he passed out backwards with his feet in the water in the winter in Pittsburgh. And through the course of the night, he died of hypothermia because he was too drunk to wake up and know that he was cold. When my mother asked the policeman, "How do you know it wasn't murder?" the policeman said to her, "There was only one set of footprints." So that's what we're going to do today. Next week, I'm going to tell you some of the things that God has done, taught us, shown us since that time. But we're going to go in just a few minutes. Don't start moving around, please. I want to talk to those of you specifically who have big plans for this weekend. And I don't know anybody by name, but I just want to tell you, there is a sound in this world that you never want to hear. And that is the sound of a mother being told that her child is dead. That is a sound you never want to hear. I don't care how bad your pain is. If you're trying to use substances to numb your pain is a drop in the bucket compared to what your parents will go through if you end up dead because you're playing around with this garbage. And if you're using drugs and alcohol to have a good time, I don't know what you heard today that sounds like a good time, but I can tell you there's no amount of fun you can have that justifies your parents getting a phone call that you're splattered all over a highway or that you've killed somebody else. I'd like to pray for you. Lord, I pray for all of these students. And I know that a lot of them have no interest in drugs and alcohol. I know that some of them are very involved. I hope that's a very small group. I hope that they want to throw up right now. Lord, I pray for any students who plan to party this weekend, that you would make them feel so horrible that they cannot have an ounce of fun. I pray that this story would be burned in their minds. I pray that those who need help would be willing to get it, would have the courage to stop before the addiction gets worse or before it becomes an addiction. I pray that any students who are using drugs and alcohol to numb pain would know that all that those things do is prolong the pain and cause a lot of pain of their own. And Lord, I pray for those who think they need it to have fun or to be cool. I'm assuming that those ideas should be gone at this point. I pray within the groups. I know how tight social cliques are here. I just pray that you would give somebody in those groups the courage to stop, and then maybe the others will. Help someone to stand up and be the leader. I just ask that anyone who needs to talk would find an adult. Anyone that wants to talk to me, send me an email and we will set something up for sure. But I pray there are plenty of adults here who could talk to you. So I just pray, Lord, that students would get help if they need it. I pray that you would keep the enemy from quickly changing our thoughts to things that are happier and easier to deal with. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.